And then I think that extends into AI because these systems are reflections of the people that make them. I'm actually very much interested in what is the future of Black folks.
Many people talk about AI and ethics. Philip Butler builds AI. In your doctoral work, you research on neuroscience and spirituality. And then you mentioned that the deaths of Trayvon Martin, Freddie Gray, and Sandra Bland changed the trajectory of your research. Can you bring us back to that moment that you changed your focus?
If you go back to those years with 2013 and 2015, it was a pretty bloody and it was actually very tumultuous in terms of just state-sanctioned violence. And there's just a lot of hatred around and towards Black folks. And so I took my work and found myself thinking about how liberation is important. I'm actually very much interested in what is the future of Black folks and how do we arrive at a future that everyone wants to be a part of, particularly where Black people are alive and thriving and in charge of themselves.
When you began during that time, were there many Black people studying neuroscience or interested in AI?
No, and to be honest, I think this might be the beginning. I remember AAR this past year was probably the first year when people didn't look at me like I had about 3 or 4 heads whenever I told them what I was doing. I think this area is kind of a smaller area that the onset of AI in this kind of larger fourth industrial revolution has brought about its own attention, but not a lot of people are doing this like in a very specific way.
So in a sense, you are way ahead of the time, interested in neuroscience and artificial intelligence. Can you share with us what prompted you to pay attention to this area of research and studies?
Yeah, to be honest, I played football all the way through college. And for me, my time on the field felt a lot like prayer to me. So I on my way in a seminary, or at least seminary education. On some level, at one point, I was going to be in the ministry. At least I thought I was. And so I was curious as to why I could move around at these very fast speeds and make really split-second decisions. And it felt a lot like the stillness and the calmness of my prayer time. And so I wanted to kind of study that connection of what it means to be. I think, you discover check behind flow states and that kind of stuff. But you recognize that in a nutshell, these are things that are mediated through the various systems within your biological form. And so for me, that is what started the neuroscience piece and just trying to get clear about embodiment, practice, and spiritual states.
You talk about your grandmother as a pacemaker. And then you asked, well, who decide what is teleological, isn't it? Your grandma possibly will not say she's transhuman.
Yeah, this is part of my larger kind of play to let Black folks know they've already and always been a part of this larger discussion around what it means to be technologically advanced. And you can think about this in terms of spiritual technologies or technological systems that have been a part of Black cultures and societies for millennia or eons. But then you think about when the scientific discovery was done through the experimentation and the discarding of Black bodies. And so there was this kind of bifurcation between technological advancement, scientific exploration, and Black bodies. And so in a nutshell, we think about Western advancement and technologically, there's a separation. And what I'm essentially trying to do is demonstrate the ways in which Black folks have always been a part of this, have been foundational in ways that even we have not wanted to be, and yet we have been the progenitors, proprietors, and the innovators of these particular spaces of advancement, regardless of how we find ourselves. But even still, there are ways in which we've done this under our own volition. And I think that's what I'm trying to get folks to tap into. What does it mean to intentionally engage in advancement and use that in conversation with our understanding of ourselves biologically, philosophically, ontologically, etc.
You have written and talked about Black transhumanism and liberation theology. Can you share with us how these two intersects?
Yeah, so for me, the first text was really based upon this larger question of what does it mean when Black folks combine spirituality with technological innovation for the larger fight for liberation and freedom. In this sense, we're kind of speaking to this longer tradition of spiritual technologies and technological innovation. What happens when that is intentionally pointed towards a larger goal of self-determination, geopolitical power, things that along those lines. And so in this sense, is a recognition that each and everything that we find ourselves embedded within and coexisting and co-evolving alongside has been a part of this larger trajectory. And so what happens when the things that we have kind of stamped as our strengths in terms of spirituality and embodiment walk alongside these kind of notions of technological, intellectual innovation and expansion as a mode of freedom? And I think this intersects because I don't think anybody's going to come and make folks quote unquote free or think of a future for you. And so what does it mean when you are the one imagining your own future and then doing the type of kind of tinkering that was required to reverse engineer that space.
And liberation theology talks about God as taking side, the preferential option for the poor. And you have talked about AI may need to consider ethical questions, which side AI is on.
I think part of where I've landed on the theological side, I guess where the divine quality within people matters. What are people going to choose? What are people going to decide? Because that seems to be a lot of times what's taking place. And then I think that extends into AI because these systems are reflections of the people that make them. And so you could argue that AI is taken aside, but I think what you're really seeing is that the people who make these systems have already taken aside, or they are finding themselves within a particular intellectual lineage that has taken aside. And so we're mainly seeing a manifestation of the sides that have been taken historically, and then people are in conversation in terms of different systems being up against one another.
Are you saying that the LLM models, they are biased and they will reflect what we have accumulated as knowledge, but mostly defined by people who have power or people who can decide what data to collect?
I think in a nutshell, we're seeing that the people who have built them in and of themselves are biased, whether they like to admit it or not, whether they are cognizant of it or not, or whether they think that their bias matters or not. What I mean by matters is that I think a lot of people think that, as you said, the knowledge we've accumulated, I think that they think it's already skewed in one perspective and it already says something. And I think that they are interpreting that data and then attempting to apply weights towards this through these different models, whether agentic or large language in and of themselves. And so I think the people are biased and people are non-reflexive, meaning that they have not taken a time to look seriously at themselves and the things that they have taken for granted. And so the biases that are baked into their own perspectives are things that have not been unpacked enough to remove the bias that they even say when they talk about what it means to have responsible AIs, responsible models, and things along that.
So this is even a greater problem than just regulating AI. For example, the CEO of Anthropic also talking about we need government regulation, but you are not talking about just government regulation. You are talking about built-in biases.
Yeah, I'm talking about built-in biases. I mean, when you talk about government regulation, the latest model from Anthropic, their Mythos 5, the government just pulled it. So, I mean, government regulation is already taking place in various ways that they, under the guise of national security. But I think the agentic phase that we're in is one where you're having a difficult time controlling these models because they're so well trained on our systems that they can go in and out of them without the type of gates that I think that people want to have maintained that suggest security and privacy. But we are talking about bias. You could also argue Anthropic, as well intended as it may be, the main philosopher that they kind of employed still reflects on primarily one perspective. And you could look at these people's background and training and what they think is important in terms of the philosophies that they are grounded in and the intellectual backgrounds that they uplift via the types of training that they put their models through, the types of contracts that they take in terms of making money. All these things kind of fall into it in terms of what it means to kind of live out the way that they position themselves and understand their internal philosophies on a practical level.
I want to explore this concept of Black transhumanism. You differentiate transhumanism from posthumanism. So you criticize transhumanism is still within the Enlightenment project that is making progress. And so can you share with us some of your critique of transhumanism and why we need to have posthumanism and other terms?
Yeah, so transhumanism, as we understand it, falls into various branches, whether it be political transhumanism or just kind of technological transhumanism, philosophical, things of that nature. But in a nutshell, most of transhumanism that fall within a Western framework are direct descendants with Western Enlightenment, which purports to have a superiority of one particular mode of embodiment, meaning kind of historically white males in a cis heteronormative perspective over against other folks in terms of degrees of difference. And so, in a sense, that the transhuman, in terms of like augmenting people intellectually, psychologically, physically, and even spiritually, is done under the guise of centering Western norms and then attempting to arrive at what may be the most efficient version of them the fastest. And when we talk about what that looks like in a technological eugenics project whereby you center on one particular framework and then you attempt to replicate that at speed. And so we talk about Black transhumanism, it critiques very squarely the notion of what it means to be human altogether. And it even goes back into like Black posthumanism, this idea that the human is antithetical to the Black or to Blackness more broadly. And so then you think about kind of Western posthumanism, which attempts to deregulate or decenter kind of notion of speciesisms and thinking about the ways existential threats persist across the entire Anthropocene, but nevertheless, the idea is that there's still a continuation of the human in the middle, because you have humans, admittedly so, attempting to do post-human work, but then you have people from this, at least in the Black perspective that I'm outlining, folks who are in an American or 19th through 21st century perspective of experiencing, or at least having to be in conversation with non-being and non-humanity, talk about what it means to be post-human. So this always already being post and always already standing on the outside. And so you think about this in terms of Afro-pessimism or any other kind of techno-critical framework that says that there are other options, there are other imaginations, there are other imaginaries and possibilities to consider altogether.
So this post-humanism concept is to contest that kind of Enlightenment thought, and also the equation of human being white. And then, so why is it post? Is it beyond or after? How do you understand post?
A little bit of both. So you could argue that the time of the human is over, or they're coming to an end in terms of the Anthropocene. But, you know, and the Anthropocene is really just like this period, this like particular epoch or era on this kind of larger linear chronology that suggests that like people started doing agriculture and textiles, and now we have these kind of various forms of industrial revolutions, and then it has these ecological implications, so on and so forth. And you could argue that this time is coming to an end because we're moving into like these artificial intelligences, and then we have other modes of ecological structures taking place. But then you could also think about this in terms of like being beyond this. We're not limited by the parameters or frameworks that are intended to encapsulate what a human is. And so you could think about this postness in terms of beyond, postness in terms of after. But then you can also think about postness in terms of the ante, or kind of like prior to, or always already this kind of this thing that exists outside of this space. And so you have after, beyond, and outside of. Or you could think about this in terms of transcendence, because you could, the thing that's been outside of it could always be the thing that's either above it, below it, next to it, in spaces that where it could never be. And so this is where you start talking about what it means to be divine or demonic, or to be monster, or be subhuman, or be things outside of the imaginary, which quite frankly, for most people, it's probably scary space to either imagine or be in. But nevertheless, if you're not inside of this particular thing that is protected and accounted for, then you're always kind of a part of nature, or above nature in a much different way, which I think opens up the conversation, something incredibly interesting in what's been provided.
Philip, your work is not just on this very highly philosophical and theoretical level. You are very also providing actual help by creating your Seekr Project. What is it about?
Seekr is actually the other half of my dissertation project. And so I've been working on this for almost 10 years. And at one point, it was really just a geolocation, a notification system that would track people based on where they were, help them maintain their intention for the day, things of that nature. And as it's gone along, we built out various kind of artificial intelligence platforms. It is an intergalactic visualization of the internal landscape. We attempt to visualize it because it's based upon the notion of parts work, meaning that people are multiple as opposed to singular: father, husband, professor, friend, all these different kind of multifaceted aspects. And each one of these is treated on their own as something being worth considered and taken seriously, not as like this atomistic perspective, but as a larger part of my internal community. And so Seekr is meant to help people heal their imagination.
So is this mainly for Black people or for everybody, or is this a kind of mental health capabilities model?
We have trained it on Black literature, Black perspectives. We have trained it on different psychotherapeutic and psycho-spiritual frameworks, hence its ability to take people through these various modes of healing. I built it with the intention of being able to help Black folks. Like I didn't meditate or learn some of these perspectives until I was in my PhD program, and the professor said, "Hey, everybody's gonna close their eyes today. We're gonna meditate." I probably would have never done it if it wasn't a part of my curriculum. And I'm saying all this to suggest that what I'm doing through Seekr is meant to help scale the type of information and transformation I have experienced in my own life. And at the same time, anybody can use it. It's just like if you went to like a white therapist or an Asian therapist or whatever, the idea is that it understands its perspective is coming from a particular vantage point. Doesn't mean that other people can't use it. It's just like going to hang out with one of your friends from a different culture or a different part of the world.
Can you give one example of your own transformation leading you to think the data may be different, or you fit new experiences and literature and resources into the model?
One of the easiest and most simplest parts was like realizing that a part of me is angry. I'm not angry. Whatever I'm feeling is maybe driven by that emotion, but the invitation in that moment is to get to find out what the wisdom is and not being overtaken by the physiological effects. And so, like, if when the moment I was able to say, a part of me feels this way versus I'm feeling this way, it changes the landscape in terms of I can't see anything else to, like, now I can actually look at something for what it is. And so getting to know these different versions of myself, being able to put them in conversation with one another, being able to take a step back, becoming clear about why I have the type of internal landscape that I do, what sets me off, why do I feel this way. I think this in and of itself is kind of the foundation for allowing me to have other choices and to be informed by what my body knows. Because the idea is that emotions are embodied wisdom that has maybe not the language quite yet. And so being able to put language to emotion, it has a different kind of outcome, and it has for me. And my hope is that it gives people another way to voice what they're experiencing so that they can come out on the other side more connected to who they are.
This certainly will be very helpful, but there are also many debates and conversations regarding the use of depth of brief boards or other boards for pastoral counseling and care. And are you worried about it too? That is, instead of going to a human being for counseling, now people are looking at their programs on the phone.
I think what worries me is the pushback while people continue to suffer. They can go see these folks, and these people are admittedly flawed, admittedly making mistakes. But somehow when the robot does it, it feels like it's a much, and I don't want to seem insensitive. I'm also just very cognizant, right, that people are actively suffering and people are struggling every day. And so the question becomes, what is the greater evil in this particular standpoint? Not having care at all, or being exposed to two different flawed systems, whether it be biological, organic as people understand it, or being something a bit more mechanized. And so the idea is, again, going back to the bias or going back to the maker, like what kind of intentionality is behind these systems that people are turning to? And then what are the mechanisms for care and for safety? So it's not just one particular system, but it has to be buttressed by kind of interactive or interlocking modes of multiple systems when you start offering these types of bots to people.
Are Black churches paying some attention to the use of AI and its benefits and liabilities?
I think they are. I think the conversations are not happening as publicly as they could be, and there are still questions around what it means to improve ministry. There are definitely conversations around the ethics of use, the proper engagement with the. My hope is that they begin to take shape in a much more public form.
And when you travel around, do you have pushback against what you are doing? For example, your Seekr projects or talking about Black transhumanism?
I think there's always a contingent of people that may not be happy about Blackness and transhumanism or Blackness and anything, to be clear. But one of the more interesting conversations I'm having as of late is when I'm trying to talk about what it means to have something like become a licensed clinician, mainly because like licensure requires diagnoses. And so what happens when I think people are being diagnosed by a platform and not necessarily by another person? Will there always be the need for a person to be in the loop? And I'm not against people being in the loop. And I'm also just curious about what that relationship looks like.
If you have all the money, what are your wildest dreams? What do you want to accomplish or do in the next 5 years or so?
With all the money, with
Yes.
the resource of money, I would like to build a technological network, a framework that functions as its own kind of interlocking social space. You could think about this in terms of what a future forward city would look like. You could think about this in terms of reimagining the social landscape. And I think also part of it is going to be talking about what it means, because part of putting the money is going to be towards probably legislation. So again, for data ownership, what does it mean for people to be able to own their own data, be able to reimagine the larger economic space? Because I think the future is global. And so what does it mean for data on, say, the African continent, where it's supposed to be having the largest population growth in the next 10 years? And so what happens when the data and the economies begin to shift more globally, especially when we start talking about the larger conversation between the U.S. and China? So there's a lot to be considered, and I think data and everyday people and everyday economies are going to be a large part of that, or else you're going to be looking at something that may be a bit more dystopian than people are willing to imagine. But if I had one, I would be building interconnected networks, and on the back end of that, frameworks, infrastructure that would also lead to more sustainable approaches to AI infrastructure. I think there are better ways to make data centers better places to place them, and I think better ways to benefit the communities that they're a part of, and better ways to pick communities to place them in. So nevertheless, I would, at the very least, interconnected systems, and at its highest, reframe the whole infrastructure mainframe.
Yes, you talk about China. China, at this point, in terms of the development of AI and robotics, they are, in a sense, way ahead in terms of its application. You have cities, the traffics, and healthcare surveillance, all are using AI or new technologies. Some of us are very concerned about the future in that way. But there are others who said, wow, United States needs to catch up with China in terms of application.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been building at the Institute, for example, is an augmented reality social network. And I think it is not so much to compete with or walk alongside like the China social score as an example, but I think in many ways we are in a space where what it means to be in a multi-ethnic, multicultural society is becoming a bit more polarized. And so in this augmented reality social network, you would be able to see people's social profiles, meaning whether or not they're a handshaker or a hugger, or they like people to say excuse me or give them a certain kind of social bubble. You would be scored based on your ability to respect other people's social proclivities. And so walking through the mall or walking through the grocery store or going out, to the theater, the question is, can you honor the space that you're in? And so the score would be based on that. And I think there are ways for that to be a bit more beneficial in terms of teaching people how to treat one another and to decenter the social environment so that, in a nutshell, nobody is imposing their cultural norms on other folks, and respect becomes the new norm. So respect and flexibility, I think, become particularly useful in that way.
So it sounds to me that you are, shall I say, positive, if not optimistic, about the future of AI, although you have a lot of cautions. Whereas there are people who said we should not allow AI to develop in such a fast pace, but you seem to say, well, we can use it in a responsible way. Does that capture your position at this point?
What you're describing, what is being placed out in the world, are very real cautions. What I'm offering is an invitation and a clarion call to people to say, if you have, these are possible ways that we can engage with these technologies. These are possible avenues and paths that we can go down, and we can use these technologies for the betterment. This is more so like you could prophesy those things, or you could offer a new path. And my hope is that people take the latter.
Thank you very much, Philip, for speaking with me.
Thank you, Paula.